Welcome into the fantasy recap. We're going to skip the recap part of this week because we've got more important stuff to deal with, and that is the playoff scenarios. Always a fun time looking at playoff scenarios for fantasy every year. This year, for redraft, which we will start with, it's a little bit different. I don't know if we've ever seen this before in Redraft League, but our playoffs are set before this week happens. The seeding is not set, but we do know the 5 teams that will be safe from the lake, and that is Mason, Jake, Gino, Ryan, and Lance. But we will go over the playoff scenarios team by team. So let's start with Mason. There is only 2 out of the 16 scenarios where Mason does not play in the 1v2 game. And that is if Ryan, Jake, and myself all win. And then it doesn't matter whether Nick or Stu win. But if Ryan, Jake, and myself all win, then Mason is the 3 seed. He has clinched the semifinals at least, so he will not have to be playing in the play-in game 4v5. But he will be playing in the 1v2 game if any scenario except for these 2 happens. Moving on to Jake. So Jake only has 2 out of the 16 scenarios where he does play in the play-in game, and that is if Ryan, Lance, and myself win. And then he will grab the 4 seed and play in the play-in game. And then he has 4 out of the 16 scenarios where he is 3 seed. And that's if Ryan, Lance, and Ian win, or if Mason, Lance, and myself win. And then Jake would be 3 seed. And any other scenario would put Jake in the 1v2 game. Remember, 1 seed is the same as 2 seed for purposes of our playoff structure. 3 seed is in the semifinals, doesn't have to play in the 4v5 game. 4 and 5 are basically the same seed. 6 and 7 are basically the same seed, and then 8, 9, and 10 are all the same also. So for myself, if I lose, then I would need Mason and Jake to both win to make it straight to the semifinals to get that bye. If that doesn't happen, if either Mason or Jake loses in the scenario that I lose, then I will be playing in the 4v5 game. And then if I win, I'll be playing in the 1v2 game unless both Mason and Jake win. So it's kind of a catch-22 for me. If it's looking like I am going to lose, I am cheering for both Mason and Jake. And then if it's looking like I'm going to win, I am cheering against both Mason and Jake. So that will be a dynamic scenario there. Moving on to Ryan. If Ryan wins, he is in the semifinals unless both Jake and myself win, and then he's in the 4v5 game. And then if he wins and both Lance and Ian win, then he'll be playing in the 1v2 game. All the other scenarios have him at 3 seed, and then if Ryan loses, he's automatically in the 4v5 game. For Lance, he'll be playing in the 4v5 game unless these 2 scenarios happen here. He would need to win and then also have Mason and Ian win. And then he would be straight to the semifinals with the 3 seed. Stu is locked into the 6v7 game, so it doesn't really matter what Stu does for his own sake this week. And then Nick, if he wins, he is in the 6v7 game. If he loses, then there are 4 scenarios where he ends up in the last place semifinals, and those 4 scenarios are all Ian wins. So if Nick loses and Ian wins, then Nick is in the last place semifinals. If Nick loses and Ian loses, then Nick is in the 6v7 game. And then if Nick wins, he is also locked into the 6v7 game. And then Ian is in the last place semifinals unless he wins and Nick loses in these 4 scenarios here. And then Nico and Trevor are obviously locked into the 9 and 10 seed, and that's how that will shake out. All right, we move into Dynasty. Our top 3 is set. We don't know the exact order yet, but we know the teams that are getting buys are Trevor, Ryan, and Mason, and they are safe from the lake. Because Ryan and Mason are safe from the lake in redraft also, they will not be jumping this year. So let's go team by team again, just like we did in redraft, starting with Trevor. So if Trevor wins, then he is in the 1v2 game. And then if Trevor loses, there are 4 scenarios where he ends up in the 3 seed spot where he doesn't play in the 1v2 game, but he still gets the bye into the semifinals, and that would happen if Ryan wins. So if Trevor or Stu win, then Trevor is in the 1v2 game, and if Trevor loses and Stu loses, then Trevor is the 3 seed. For Ryan, pretty simple, except for the one scenario down here. But for Ryan, he wins, and he is in the 1v2 game, unless he wins and Trevor wins and Mason wins. And in that scenario, Ryan would be 3 seed still. And then all of the other scenarios where Ryan loses, he is also 3 seed. For Mason, there's only 2 shots at the 3 seed. The rest is the 1v2 game. For Mason to get the 3 seed, he would need Nick, Ryan, and Trevor to all win, and then Mason would be 3 seed. But if that doesn't happen, then Mason is in the 1v2 game. So if Mason loses, then if Stu or Nico win, then Mason is in the 1v2 game. Lance, start with Lance here, and if Lance wins, he is obviously automatically in because that is the division championship game. But if Lance loses in these scenarios here, he would be playing in the 6v7 game unless both Trevor and Stu won. So if Trevor and Stu win and Lance loses, then he's playing in the 5v4 game. For myself, it's pretty simple. Win, 5v4, lose, 6v7. To Nick would have to win, and he is in the 5v4. That's pretty simple there. And then if he loses, he would need Lance, Mason, well, not need Mason, but because he would have already lost. But if he loses to Mason, then Nick will need Lance and Trevor to win. If Lance and Trevor win, then Nick is in the 5v4 game, even though he lost. In any other scenario, he's in the 6v7 game. Stu is the only one eliminated from contention completely in Dynasty, but he can still give himself another shot to stay out of the lake by being 7th seed, and in that scenario, Stu would need to win, and then he would also need Trevor to win. So if Stu and Trevor win, then Stu gets 2 shots at not being last place. Nico is kind of all over the place here. For Nico to make the 5v4 game and have a shot at the championship, he would need to win and also have Mason win. So Nico needs to win and Mason win, and he is in. And then if Nico doesn't win in these scenarios here, and Stu does, so if Nico loses and Stu wins, then Nico is in the last place game automatically in these 4 scenarios here. And then the rest of the scenarios have Nico playing in the 6v7 game, giving himself 2 shots to stay out of the lake there. So, win and Mason win puts Nico into the playoffs, into the 4v5 game, play-in game. Lose and Stu win, Nico goes directly to the last place game. In any other scenario, puts him in the 6v7 game. So those are the Dynasty playoff scenarios. I'll post these in the chat, obviously. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be mostly free this week, leading up to the games. Just wanted to make sure that you remember that a couple big things. Number one, that obviously Thanksgiving is Thursday, and there are 3 games on Thanksgiving Day, so make sure to set your lineup. The first game is at 12:30, Lions-Packers. And also wanted to let everyone know, and make sure you remember this, that the trade deadline for both leagues is kickoff of the Lions-Packers game at 12:30 on Thanksgiving Day. So you've got a couple more days to trade. Use these playoff scenarios to your advantage, like, in Dynasty here, if, Stu is eliminated, so he might be a seller, at the deadline, because you don't want to stay out of the lake, but you don't want to be buying a bunch of players and selling off a bunch of picks if you're not in the playoffs. And then same thing in redraft. Pay attention to, are you going to play week 13? Are you going to be in the last place semifinals? Do you think you're going to win? Those kind of things. If you're 3 seed, you're not playing week 13, obviously. So those kind of things pay attention to when considering trades and all that. And then we'll see you guys next week for the final playoff standings and playoff brackets and all that kind of stuff. So happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.